The Amalgamated Transit Union has been working to help affiliated locals in the U.S. and Canada respond to the continuing epidemic of assaults on their members. This workshop describes this campaign, defines the sources of assaults and some effective control measures, and lays out local, regional, and national initiatives to protect transit workers and the riding public. In a 2012 survey of ATU and Transport Workers Union of America local union leaders, with responses from 84 locals in 33 states and provinces, 26% reported that assaults were a serious issue or an important issue for their members, and 37% found it to be of medium importance. The core principle of the union's assaults prevention campaign is the need to protect transit workers and the riding public. Employers are legally responsible to provide safe workplaces, and the burden must not be on workers to defend themselves. The goal is to fix the hazards, not to blame workers for what happens to them. As with all workplace hazards, there are preferred methods of controls, and workers and their unions have an important role to play in identifying, designing, and implementing remedies. There are four main types of workplace violence. There's criminal intent violence, that would be theft. There's customer or client violence based on their anger or experience of conflict. There's worker-on-worker violence, often connected to anger also and to bullying. And personal relationship violence, which is not work-related, but the perpetrator knows where the victim works. Decades of research show that workplace assault is most likely to occur to workers who interact directly with public, work alone, often in a mobile workplace, and late at night or early morning hours. Other risk factors include working in high-crime areas, providing services to people who may experience frustration, handling money or fares, and being responsible for enforcement. Workplaces with uncontrolled access to the public and inadequate escape routes also endanger workers. All of these characterize transit employment. Understanding these factors should help employers protect workers better. Researchers have defined categories of transit workplace assaults that range in severity across verbal harassment or intimidation, physical threat, spitting, projectiles thrown at the vehicle or in the work area, physical assault without weapon, physical assault on a worker with a weapon other than a firearm, and physical assault with a firearm.
I'm Kathy Michelby. The sheriff wants you to take a good look at this video of the sudden assault. The man boards the bus and starts hitting the driver.
New at 10:12 News' Mike Miller spoke with the drivers' union and joins us live from Milwaukee's northwest side, where the bus eventually crashed.
Yeah, Toya, it's a busy area too. There are homes, there are businesses along here. There's even a couple of gas stations. The bus could have careened out of control and clipped off a gas pump or something. Could have been very tragic. Instead, the driver kept his cool while he was being attacked.
Just after 3 p.m. yesterday near 68th and Silver Spring, some passengers get on the bus. Then the suspect races up the steps and starts pummeling the driver with his fists. The suspect yells at the driver he's going to stab him. Then he runs to the back of the bus, but quickly returns to pound on the driver again. And all this is happening with 8 passengers on board and the bus hitting speeds up to 40 miles an hour.
The suspect literally grabbed onto the steering wheel and used his foot to push down on the accelerator.
You get up in the morning, you go to work, and you don't know what's going to happen. Who's going to get on, what they're going to do, what they're going to say.
At one point, the bus swerved into the oncoming lane of traffic. The driver eventually crashed into a tree, and the suspect ran off.
If the same thing would have happened on a plane yesterday afternoon, somebody would have stormed the cockpit and would have punched the pilot in the face and grabbed the stick and forced it to crash, this would have been international news.
If somebody knows who this guy is, and when they see it, I think they'll be appalled enough to realize that this guy needs to be taken off the street.
The sheriff's department says that suspect is probably between 17 and 20 years old. He apparently thought he knew the driver, and the driver wronged him in the past somehow, but the driver says he does not recognize the suspect at all. If you think you might know who that suspect is, please call the sheriff's department at 278-4788. Live in Milwaukee, Mike Miller, WISN 12 News.
All right, Mike, you have learned some information about the driver and his condition?
The driver, we know his name is not being released. He's been a bus driver for about 4 4 years. He was treated at a hospital and released. The union people say he is emotionally upset.
All right, thank you.
The possible effects of this kind of workplace assault are worker injury, psychological trauma, rider injury, vehicle damage, and other property damage. As we've seen, more than one of these can occur in a single assault event. The first step in preventing assaults is understanding where, when, and how assaults are occurring in the specific work environment. There are existing sources of data such as first reports of injuries and events, logs of injuries and illnesses, also known as OSHA logs, and other reports and data analyses produced internally by the employer. The union or a joint labor management group can carry out surveys of the workplace. The Union Safety Committee can use a mapping technique to collect data about workplace risks, to track interventions, to record improvements, and show problems as they change over time, and to communicate with workers and with management. You may want to share the data you collect with others, with fellow unions in your area, with community groups and law enforcement, and with legislators. Here is how to develop a workplace assaults map. Start by drawing your workplace, showing where assaults occur and all types of assaults. Note any additional information you have about who is exposed, the times of exposure, and the illnesses and injuries and illnesses that have occurred. If you can, assess how serious the hazard is in the location you are drawing. How often does it occur, and how serious is the result? Next, think about how the hazard could be blocked or eliminated. Techniques for choosing controls at the source, at the path, and at the target, that would be you, and using engineering, administrative, and personal protective equipment controls will be described shortly in this presentation. Your map may focus on a specific work area, for example, a booth and the space around it. It can be laid out to include the whole system. It can even map time rather than space. Just when are you more at risk? One way to look at hazard control is in terms of the source of the hazard, the path, and the target, that is you. It's most effective to control the hazard at the source. It's least effective to control the hazard at the end point. The industrial hygiene approach to hazards is based on this pyramid or hierarchy of controls. In this pyramid, the more effective method is preferred. That is, changing the work environment to make it safer. When you cannot, you consider setting up rules and policies that reduce the risk. In a few cases, you provide workers with personal protective equipment. You only use the weaker, lower-level controls in the brief time when you can't use the better, higher-level controls. In a national study of practices to protect bus operators from passenger assault, researchers investigated what transit agencies were doing to protect bus drivers. They reported that some measures are more appropriate for preventing certain types of attacks. For example, de-escalation training could reduce assaults arising from disputes, and barriers were thought to be more useful against spontaneous attacks. Transit agencies reported that assaults typically occurred in the evening through late night and early morning, followed by afternoon peak period and school dismissal times. Employers' most commonly reported concerns were verbal threats, intimidation, and harassment, followed by spitting, then by assaults involving projectiles thrown at the bus and inside the bus. In this case, bus operators or their unions were not surveyed. In the past, a high percentage of assaults were caused by fare issues. However, this is no longer so, as fare and enforcement policies have changed. The researchers felt that a significant number of assaults may have been instigated by the behavior or action of the bus operator, according to the employers. This study discussed proposed or actual protections for transit agencies to consider. Some focused on the bus driver. These included partitions, driver exit doors, improved lighting, cashless fare collection, elimination of fare enforcement responsibility, and de-escalation training. Applying other controls might contribute to a safer environment for all transit workers and for passengers. These were onboard police presence and police patrols, video and audio surveillance, communication, alarms, panic buttons, a violence prevention program with union and worker involvement, felony assault legislation with approved prosecutions, and public education. The research did not show evidence for which of these methods were in fact effective. There are several regional and national initiatives to protect transit workers from violence. In many jurisdictions, felony legislation provides additional legal protection for transit workers. For example, the Canadian House of Commons Bill 221 requires judges to consider a transit driver's occupation as an aggravating circumstance in assault sentencing. The Federal Transit Administration has established a national dialogue on transit worker assault with a proposal to establish rail and bus safety standards, practices, or protocols for protecting rail and bus operators from the risk of assault. The ATU and other unions played key roles in getting this language included in the Congressional Appropriations Acts.
They've been spit on, knives have come out, and punches have been thrown. Every year, more than 2,000 bus drivers are the victims of these kinds of assaults, but now new legislation means tougher penalties for the perpetrators.
We've been assaulted, we continue to be assaulted, and for the federal government to actually pay attention to us, it's really quite breathtaking. We're all extremely excited about this.
Bill S-221 unanimously passed third reading in the House of Commons today. That means judges are required to consider a transit driver's occupation as an aggravating circumstance when it comes to sentencing.
I think it's great for all public transit operators across Canada now that they have some additional protection under the criminal code.
The new law will also protect anyone operating taxis, ferries, school buses, trains, and subways. All jobs where providing a safe work environment is becoming more difficult. But that's not the only development. TransLink is now testing its plexiglass barrier in public, and BC Transit is about to launch a pilot project of its own.
The cameras that are mounted right in the center will pick up activity forward and behind.
75 buses in Greater Victoria and 25 in Kamloops are now equipped with video surveillance. While there will be no live monitoring, drivers will be able to activate a record when an incident occurs.
He or she would reach over to their left side and push the tag button. It'll give us the ability to collect the proper evidence and share it with the authorities.
With proper signage, the idea is the cameras will also act as a deterrent. Pair that with the harsher penalties, and the hope is to see a dramatic drop in the number of drivers assaulted.
We'll be able to sit there and start prosecuting these people. This is just one more tool that we're able to employ to try and prevent these kind of attacks from happening.
Kylie Stanton, Global News, Victoria.
Although there is no OSHA standard on workplace assaults, workplace violence prevention plans have been included in some state workplace safety regulations. These require transit workers and union participation to be effective. New York State public employer workplace violence prevention law requires an ongoing risk assessment for occupational assaults and homicides. Employers must produce written workplace violence prevention plans to include a list of specific risk factors in the workplace and methods that the employer will use to prevent assaults and homicides. They need to provide annual training for transit workers on the risk factors and on the measures the employer has implemented to protect workers, and the details of the written workplace program. The programs have to demonstrate management commitment and employee involvement, including a formal role for unions. The ATU Assaults Campaign and local union actions face challenges. OSHA has no workplace violence standard, and some public sector transit agencies are not even covered by OSHA. The Federal Occupational Research Group, NIOSH, has no current emphasis on operator assault. And national transportation agencies and organizations are only beginning to focus on violence against transportation workers from the worker's perspective. Although there is no OSHA standard on assault, there is guidance for some target industries. For example, taxi drivers. Another challenge is finding controls that are widely effective. Felony assault legislation has a low rate of conviction and penalties. Its effectiveness as a deterrent is unknown. Bus operators and transit locals have mixed reactions to engineering controls, such as partitions, video surveillance. And this is in part because they have no role in design and implementation of these solutions. Transit management, union staff, and membership are not adequately educated on risk factors and on hazard controls for workplace violence. The factors that contribute to assaults can vary by transit agency, by title, and even from one work location or route to another. Winning protections requires collecting data to make the best case. Transit unions need to document the frequency, type, and circumstances of assaults that occur, the rates of physical or mental harm and fatalities, the amount of related lost work time and costs, the assault-induced accidents, the amount of disciplinary action or retaliation against bus operators, the range of collective bargaining language and employer policies, and good examples of employer workplace violence prevention programs. You can help the ATU collect this information. What else is needed? Local union leadership, safety reps, and activists can do a lot to target areas of concern, to propose solutions, and to push management for change. On a broader scale, the ATU continues to demand action from employers, from legislators, and from the FTA. You can help by finding out what assaults are occurring in your local, negotiating protections from your employer, and sharing information about your members' risks and your successes.